Hi, I'm Emily and this is Made on Mill. In this video, I'll be sharing with you how to line a basket. So I have these two baskets that I thrifted. Both of them came with liners. This one here I paid $7.99 for, but as you can see, the basket, like the liner is quite dirty, so I want to replace it. Now my white basket came with a liner that was actually removable, so I was able to wash it, but there is still some staining on it, so I just want to make a new one. But this is a really great way for you to use something secondhand and just do a little upcycle on it so you can keep using it. I know we are generating some waste, but we're not consuming anything new and we are kind of fixing up what already exists. I have some remnant fabric of an old duvet cover. I used this duvet cover to make the Junie dress earlier this year, and so I have some leftover fabric. So it's this white fabric with this grayish purplish striping on it, but it's really a nice thick cotton. I thought that would look good with the white basket. It would pair nicely with this one. So I'm going to use this to line that, and then I'll walk you through how I use the existing liner as a template. If you don't have an existing liner in a basket and you want to line it, what you could really just do is take some newspaper and just cut out pieces that fit, say, on the bottom and then the sides as well, and then just add some extra seam allowance on those measurements, and then you could kind of just draft your own pattern for them. If you're new here, this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, I like to focus on sustainable crafting, so primarily sewing and crocheting. I have a lot of free crochet patterns and as well as some sewing tutorials. I do a little bit of gardening, but it's mainly sustainable crafting, finding ways to repurpose materials that we already have or finding items secondhand and then upcycling them. If you're interested in this type of content, I would love if you would follow along and subscribe and watch some of my future videos. This is my existing liner from the white basket and it is stitched together. So what I'm going to start by doing is simply just cutting the pieces apart. You could seam rip this to get the exact measurements. However, this is just going to sit in a basket. It's not a garment. It doesn't need to fit precisely. So to save time, I'm simply just going to cut along the existing seams here so I can get a general idea of what my pattern pieces will look like. What I have here are the pieces that sit around the interior of the basket along the sides here. Made up of two pieces sewn together and then a third piece for the bottom of the basket. Have our round piece for the bottom here. I cut it out pretty roughly, so I will likely make a much smoother oval when I cut it out on the fabric. But since the vertical pieces or the side pieces here are matching, I'm just going to use one of these as a template. I'm going to generally trace around the outside of this, keeping in mind of a seam allowance here. I'll probably use maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch just so I can do a double rolled hem. I don't want to see the raw edges like they have done here. And then I will likely cut some separate ties for the top. So for now, I'm just going to cut here and around, and then I will cut the ties separately. Now I need to decide if I want my pattern here to be the stripes to sit horizontal or vertically, and I think I want them to sit upright in the basket. So I'll make sure I orient my fabric depending on how I want it to sit in the basket. At this point, I'm going to fold it in half just to make sure I have some symmetry. Okay, so anywhere where I don't have symmetry, I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up. Okay, so I have my side piece here. I'm gonna go ahead and cut out another piece, making sure that it's a mirror image. All my pieces are cut out now except for the straps, which we'll do after. But I just wanted to make a note here. So I measured the bottom of the side piece here, and this measures 16 inches. So I know I have 16 plus 16 inches here. Now this is the bottom piece, the oval that will sit in the bottom of the basket. And so I need to make sure I have enough circumference around this to accommodate 16 plus 16. So I folded this in half and measured around, and it measured 17 inches. So this is good. I have more circumference on my oval than I do on the two side pieces. So what this means is I can go ahead and stitch up the sides here on the side pieces. So I'll stitch up those sides, and then I'll stitch up these sides down here. That will create a ring, an opening in the bottom, and then I can ease this into it since this will be bigger than that opening. If this opening was bigger than my oval piece, I would need to recut the oval piece so that it would fit. This just means I'm going to have a little extra fabric, which can easily be trimmed off. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with, yes, I'm gonna sew up the side seams first and finish those seams. I'm gonna do French seams here just so those raw edges are protected. So I will start by sewing them wrong sides together because we're doing French seams. And I'll use like a 1/4 inch seam allowance, something really small. So if you used a bigger seam allowance, you can go ahead and trim that away. I'm not gonna trim anyway at this time, but I am going to flip it around, press this, and then we'll sew it back up. These seams are nicely pressed, so now I'm going to go ahead and stitch up along here, ensuring that the seam allowance on the first side is captured in my stitching line and none is poking through. So this is the right side of that seam here. As you can see, our pattern matching is pretty good. It looks nice. So I'm gonna go ahead, I've pressed it to the right side here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just stitch that down. So that's how it looks here. It's just neatly stitched down, tucked away, and on the reverse side here. Because this is going to be removable from the basket, it's important that it can be washed. And so that's why I just wanted to make sure that all my finishes are high quality. Okay, we have the sides done here. At this point, it would be a good idea to make sure this fits in the basket. Once you've done that, then we are going to add the bottom oval in here. So we'll start pinning like this all the way around. I'm gonna line up this side here and this side first, and then the two edges. And then because remember the oval was bigger than this, I'll just kind of have to ease it in. Okay, that took some finessing to get it in, but it's sitting pretty flat. I just want to take a look from this side here. And it looks like generally I have some pattern matching, which is awesome. And it looks pretty symmetrical on both sides, which is great. So it's looking really good. Obviously, we're gonna trim the top here and add those ties, but the bottom is looking really good and that's fitting nicely, so I'm happy with it. I'm gonna go ahead and sew this together now. So I've gone ahead and trimmed any extra fabric away from the seam allowance. What I think I'm going to do is cut out some bias tape from the rest of the fabric I have. And the reason for that is it will cover up this raw edge really nicely so that it's completely washable and it'll hold up, but it's also going to create some structure to this. It's going to make this a lot stiffer. It's going to make it sit really nicely in the bottom of the basket. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do, is cut out lots of bias tape. I'm going to make my own. I will do a piece of bias tape around the curved edge here, and then I will stop it on both sides, and then I'll do another bias piece along the top here, but I'll extend it past so that we have those strap pieces. Hi, it's the next day. I only got so far and then I had to do some mending yesterday, so I'm back at it now. So I'm very happy with how it's sitting in the basket, how it's fitting. I did the trimming on the edge. But last night I had a thought that I was going to change the design of how I finished this. So originally I was going to add the bias tape around here to finish this raw edge on the side. But now I'm going to fold it over, and I'll show you how to do this. I'm going to fold it over and create a casing, and I'm going to add elastic in there, and that's going to help it hold onto the basket a little bit better on this side as well as this side here. And then I will continue with putting the bias tape around this curved edge here, and then that will tie together here. So today we need to make the bias tape and then add in that elastic and create a casing for it. So I'll walk you through those steps. So to create bias binding or bias tape, we need to cut on the bias. So we have our finished edge of the fabric here, so we know this is on the grain, and because this is woven fabric, the grain line runs in two directions and they're at 90 degrees to each other, so this way and this way. So to cut on the bias, we need to cut on a diagonal this way. Now I'm using scrap fabric, so my pieces are going to be quite short. That's fine. So the best way to make bias tape, I find, is if you have one of these self-healing mats, a quilter's ruler that you can see the measurements through on the other side, and then a rotary blade here. So I'm going to start by just kind of folding this up so it's at a 45-degree angle, and so I know this is my bias. This side is already folded here, and this is not a raw edge, so when we make our width measurements, we need to take that into account. So I typically like to do anywhere from 2 inches to 1.5 inches. I'm gonna cut my bias tape 2 inches wide here. So this means that my first cut, I only do 1 inch because it's folded. So I have 1 inch on either side of the fold. So I'm lining up my 1 inch line here, and then I will simply cut here. So this is now our bias tape. So I'm going to continue to cut pieces that are 2 inches wide, such as this. So for the next one, because we have a raw edge here, I will need to cut a 2-inch wide section. So the edges, I just made sure they were cut on the grain line. So this angle here would be 45 degrees. And so I did that to all the ends there. And then to create the tape, we will go ahead and line the pieces up, right sides together, such as this, and then you will stitch from this point here down to this point here. So when you take this to your ironing board, you will press that seam open on the back. And after I attach them all together, I will take the whole long piece to my iron. And what I will do is fold it together like this and press it so it's folded in half like this. Once I press it in half, I will open it back up and I'll be able to see that line that runs through the center. Then I will go ahead and fold each side towards that line, such as this. Okay, and then I will press that, and then the final step will be to fold that in half and press it like this, so you have everything nicely enclosed. And that is how you create bias tape. And so this is how the tape is looking. Let's talk about adding the elastic along the side here. We're going to do that before we add the bias tape. So this I've measured from this end over to this end is 17 inches. And because I want the elastic to scrunch up, I need to cut an elastic size that is shorter than 17 inches. So you think I'm going to go with maybe like 14 inches, maybe 15, because this isn't that much bigger than the basket, so I don't need it to gather that much. So I might start with 15 inches, and then if I need to shorten it, I can. What I'm going to do to finish this edge is just fold it over once like this, and then again so that raw edge is enclosed. And I'll leave maybe like 3/4 of an inch to, yeah, about 3/4 of an inch to feed that elastic through. So I'll just sew this hem along the length of here, but I'm going to iron that first. I will repeat this for the other side and then go and press it to iron it down. This just helps the stitches settle in. That seam line is sewn, and now we need to add the elastic. I cut them about 14 inches and that will fit in there nicely. So to feed them through, I'm going to use the safety pin method. I'm sure this is nothing new. And then I'm just going to feed it in that channel we made. Once I have it in this end to the point where this is going to get pulled in, I will stitch that. So this elastic has been fed through. It's not all the way through yet, but this is about to be sucked in. So at this point, I want to go ahead and just run a couple straight stitches here so that this elastic won't get pulled through and it's secured at this end. Remember, we're going to be adding the bias tape here, so don't worry about that overhang. So that has been fully secured. Once I bring it to the other side, I will do the same thing to secure the other end. I've pulled this through the other end and I'm just checking to see how much tension that elastic has created, and it's not very much. So I'm actually going to pull it through and cut an additional about 2 inches off there. So once you're happy with that, then you can go ahead and secure the elastic where you want and then trim off any excess. Before I feed the other side in, I'm going to, since I started with 2 lengths of elastic that were the same measurement, and this is the excess that I cut off of the one I've already fed through, I'm just going to measure that on here and take that off. So now I know this is the length of elastic I need to feed through the other channel without trimming any from either side. This is fitting really well. I just put it on the basket and that elastic is holding nicely. So now we can go ahead, take this off and begin to add the bias tape to this edge here. I left from the edge, I've left 20 inches of excess on each side, so that will become the ties. Then I have unfolded the bias tape and I have pinned the edge of the right side to the right side of the liner. And so what we will do now is sew along that fold line here that we had pressed, and we'll stitch along there. Once that's stitched, then we can go ahead and fold this to the other side like that, and then we'll stitch in the ditch to catch the back. That has been sewn on, and now I have gone ahead and folded the bias tape around to the back, and it's covering that seam, and I have pinned it just below the stitch line, so I know I'm catching the excessive tape at the back here. So now what we're going to do is start our stitching line at the end here. I have gone ahead and closed those raw edges in there. So I will start stitching here, pivot and head down, and then that will enclose the entire length, the strap with a straight stitch, and all those raw edges will be enclosed. And then I'll continue that stitching line till I get back to my liner and continue it along here to the other side and along this length, finishing at this end. I'll continue this to the end here, and then I will repeat that whole process for the other side here. We have to finish the raw edge on the inside of the liner around the bottom here. So what I've done is taken my leftover bias tape and I have pinned it around there, so matching up the open edge to the raw edge of that seam allowance here. So I will go ahead and stitch around all along this line here, and then similar to how we did the straps, I will fold this over, pin it, and then enclose it. So where we have the overlap here, the one on the inside here, I have folded over here, that raw edge, so that when we go to fold this over completely, there'll be no exposed raw edges. So I have pinned that bias tape around, enclosing that raw seam there. So now I'm going to go ahead and stitch here along the ditch. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you spending your time here. I hope this was a helpful video and showed you just how easy it can be to line a thrifted basket. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you could give it a like, share it with someone, or leave a comment. Have a wonderful day.